what you call self-cannibalism is obviously best described in the transformation that makes a caterpillar into a butterfly. Just human life is a lot messier than that. In business, the case in point is the story of Andy Grove with Intel and his decision to cannibalize, to kill the DRAM business and go into microprocessors, and that ultimately led to Intel's success. You're describing that the pioneers, the entrepreneurs, the people that dare to either discover the new story or tell a new story and actualize it by new policies or new strategies, get to lead and shape the new reality that's emerging, and ultimately get to shape the new story that's emerging.
Mm-hmm. And I like to say, in the 19th century, if you want to shape the world, you probably become an author or a philosopher. In the 20th century, you probably would become a politician. In the 21st century, you'll probably be part of the technological revolution in some point of it, but yeah.
In the first half of the 21st century, we will gradually journey here to ask what's going to happen in the second half of the 21st century. But I will cede the prospective idea that the very concepts you're sharing could be the opportunities in front of us. If you can participate in shaping or influencing the revolution of consciousness, which is what you're doing through the columns you write, perhaps that by itself is another way to lead or to win. Anytime we use a word like lead or win, we are actually using a construct that's part of a story. It may be that we need to use different verbs altogether to thrive, to prosper, to open a space where things can grow. All those are plausible as we unfold the story that we are living into right now.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I agree. I totally agree with it. But we have to, in order to do it, we must really, and I will say it again, we must leave the old terms that we used. I mean, this is something that, as I see it, it's fundamental. I mean, we must create new terms, create a new ideas, and something. And one more thing, I think that when we talk about technology and the technological revolution, we must remember there is a difference between what I call the proletariat of technology and the people who create the ideas, the concepts. Because technological revolution, more than it's a technological revolution, it's a conceptual revolution. I mean, this is all the thing of creating a new story. But yes, I agree with you.
The 20th century, primarily the second half of the 20th century, after we came through 2 world wars, unfolded several complementing stories. Specifically, there is the interior story, and in parallel to it, there is the acceleration of the technological revolution that you're just describing there. In the interior worlds, Jung talked about the Aquarian age, and central to it was his individuation project, the idea that we humans are going to become more individuated. And you could observe that the hippie movement and all that followed through that led to the sexual revolution, the environmental movement, the second wave of the feminist and women liberation movement. And then you have, in parallel to that, the technological revolution, the beginning of transistors, personal computers, all the way to what you are describing now with the idea of the internet and the cloud, mobile, we still call them mobile phones. So you emphasize in your columns this, you take a view of how much of that shift from the centralized FDR government led into what you call the decentralized technologies, which I recognize to be empowering or accelerating the individuation project. What are the other plot lines in this story that you identify that are so important, that accelerate us through this second half of the 20th century to what you're describing now as we need to learn to let go of the old story?
I think that, I see it from an Israeli point of view, but when I was teaching at Yale, I had this experience from the American point of view, and I think that in a lot of ways, it's what is really changing now is the way to know things and to talk about things. I mean, this is the whole discourse around the social networks, etc. I think what they gave to the world, and it's a very long conversation, maybe we'll touch it in the more further in the conversation, but I think that when people start to talk with each other, when people start to share information, this is what creates changes. This is what changed the idea, and therefore I think that in the 20th century there were not two different stories, interior and the political story. It was one story that actually got applicate in two ways. It applicate in the interior way and in the political way. And I think this is what's so amazing about consciousness. I mean, it all starts in the way that people see the world, in the way people understand the world, the meaning that they give to what's happening in the world. When I teach writing, I really emphasize this idea that what's happening in the world, it's not important. What is important in stories is the meaning that we give to what is happening. And I think this is something that we must remember when we're trying to understand what is going on now. It's not about the world, it's about the way we see the world.
What do you see, what do you observe that's apparent with the people that are most adaptable, easy to recognize in your story? What are some of the characteristics or skills that they demonstrate, that when you see people that are able to lead by changing consciousness and discover or live into in your stories? What are some of the, I'm asking you now about the interior dimension. What are some core observations you have there?
At first, and the most important, the understanding that we live inside the story, that it's not the world as is, it's a story, and it can change, it can crumble, etc. This is the most important thing. When I talk with someone, when I talk with an entrepreneur, and he can't understand the idea of the story, I know there's something wrong there. And when I talk with someone and he understands that we work with concepts and not with pure technology, this is something that I can contact with and I can't understand it. I think this is something that we must, even if it's not intuitive to us, we must work on it, on this understanding. It's only a story. This time is a story. The meaning that we give to things, they are very important. I mean, the story is very, very important. We want to be able to exist without an order, but still, it's something that can be changed, and we're not able to control on the changing. I mean, it's...
So a way to instantiate, by way of an example, what you're saying there is, so sure, there are data centers all around the planet that support the infrastructure of the internet. But what you're saying is that the internet and the cloud is, first of all, a concept, a story, and then we developed the infrastructure to it. And what we are developing and what we bring to life through the internet and the cloud is the expansion of that story. And unless you recognize that, you're missing the bigger potential, because it's not just the objective facts outside of you, it's that connected story that you are part of.
Yeah, I think we can see it. I mean, the division between technological enterprise and conceptual enterprise is something that we can see in the world. I mean, Amazon, it's not a technological enterprise. It's a conceptual enterprise. There is no new technology there. It's a little tiny bit, but still, the idea of ordering the world in some other way, this is what's so important about Amazon, so-called Google. It starts with a technological, as a technological enterprise, but actually they made the reborn of them when they understood that they are a conceptual enterprise. It's not about the searching, it's about the data, it's about all this stuff. So I think that I like to think about what is going on today. The internet revolution, it's like discovering America. There are three ways to react when you discover a new continent. The first reaction is to say, oh, I don't care about this, it's not interesting. The second way to react, it's to go to America, to take the gold, and going back to Europe to use the gold. And the most interesting and relevant and important approach is to go to America and to develop a new continent. And this is what's going on today. The people, I think they're most interesting, and they will be the people who shape the new world. They are the people who try to create a new continent over the digital world, through the technological revolution, but they understand that it's not only about technology, and it's not only about businesses. It's about really creating a new order. It's a terrifying job, but it's a job that people who understands it, they are the people who create the not only most important enterprises, but also the most valuable enterprises.
So in those three groupings you painted, initially there was a very small minority that decided to immigrate to America. And then you had a fourth group, which were people that not so much that they were just going to the new world, they actually looked to escape the old world, either because of famine or because of religious persecution and so on. So it is interesting. Sometime you move into the new world because you can no longer stay in the old world. You basically need to escape it to survive, or you've had the few pioneers who were compelled or inspired to discover the new world. It matters not. You cross the ocean, the unsafe, the unknown, travel through the ocean to get to a new continent. That's the power of this metaphor, that story.
I think you're saying something that it's very interesting. I totally agree that if we'll take it one step further, the tragedy of the strong people today, that they don't have the incentive to go to the new world, and then they stay on behind. Okay, I mean, in nowadays, as much as you're stronger, the less you're much less relevant to the world, because you don't have the incentive to become relevant. I hope that I'm clear.
You're very clear. What you're saying is, when you're invested in the old paradigm and the power of the old paradigm, you are less likely to be relevant and to adapt. The one place where people are trying to circumvent that pattern are obviously the large platform companies, because they hold the power and they're trying to make the bridge to the future, and we're seeing the struggle that they are encountering. But before we go to talk about these companies for a minute, let's just another comment on that bridge from the old world to the new world, the 20th century into the 21st century. because you make continual observation in your columns about the failure of institutions. And we are seeing the failure of legal institutions, media and state institutions. Practically all institutions are failing. And we can probably identify a few key patterns of the failure of institutions. The first is ideological capture. The second is polarization and conflict, and the loss of the middle ground where they can become inclusive to different populations. The third is the contamination and the breakdown of the information landscape. And the fourth is the main one you are asserting now, a loss of relevance. Because if you're not relevant to people, the currency of why people gathered around you in the first place is no longer there. The power evaporates from under you. So the provocative thing in these observations you make is what's going to happen with the state. Because you said the state was godly, and now the state is in a defense posture. My question is, what is the story you tell in your mind? Will we see the extreme end, the state will disappear and will be replaced by something else? Will we see the state more receding to the background as a background stage and something else will arise? And you may say that we are already in this story. I'm curious, how do you navigate, how do you develop that story? What's going to happen with the state? Because in fairness, we still don't have a credible replacement for the legal and the state institutions.
So, as I love to say, I don't have answers. I mean, I don't know what is going to happen, but I really know that about the state, as I wrote in my essay about the end of the age of politics, we grew up and we discovered that our father is not the strongest, okay? We discovered that it's much more complicated, as you described now with the four reasons. And I think that we have to remember when we try to think about the new time that we live in, one of the most interesting trends that I see is, until the 18th century, we used to live under the idea of craft, right? People went to the tailor, he created their clothes, etc. And then we moved to the times of mass production. We all were Levi's, right? And now we're in a lot of ways, we're moving back to the craft, but we are using tools of the mass productions. And I think it's not only existential trend, it's also a political trend, meaning we will see, as I see it, much more small communities, much more specific communities. If you think about this, the whole idea of the nation state, it's mass production idea. We will create one big identity that it will fit to everyone. In Israel, we call it a kura hituch. I don't know how you can translate it, but the idea of everyone is the same, everyone shares the same identity, Judaism is the same, being Israeli is the same. And I think that what we see now, it's a lot of kinds of Israelity, a lot of identities people share, but we still use tools of mass production. I mean, it's a combination that I can't really know how it will work, but I think that we must remember this trend of the specific from one side, but of creation, which they are huge and massive.
So inside that story, I recognize it provides a new context and lens to think about the separatist movements we've seen in Europe over the last decade, where various groups want to reclaim their original identity. You wonder whether they're trying to go back or whether they're trying to go forward or both. One of your observations is that there is this polarity of the people that want to journey to the past and the people that want to journey into the future.